Hello and welcome to Comic Island. My name is Arden, and this is my review of Extermination #1. So there's a new X-Men comic out, kicking off a new event for the X-Men comics as a whole, assuming that this is going to be some sort of big crossover event, like they did all the time back in their heyday in the modern age. And I'm pretty excited about this one. Written by Ed Brisson, with Pepe Larraz doing the artwork, and Marta Garcia doing the coloring, this is a fun issue overall that I quite enjoyed. It really isn't that special in terms of plot. As far as X-Men events go, it's pretty standard in that regard. We basically are dealing with some sort of figure traveling in from the future to fix some sort of cataclysm. There's other villains and shenanigans going on. Clearly something's afoot that the X-Men don't fully understand. And then there's a couple of character deaths to sort of amp up the stakes. Nothing that I've described is that unusual as far as big X-Men events go, or comic book crossover events in general. Yet I quite enjoyed this thing on the whole. For one thing, the deaths don't feel as cheap as they usually do. We basically lost an alternate version of Storm that's a vampire called Bloodstorm, I believe, as well as Cable. Both pretty significant deaths, I suppose, but they're characters that can easily be replaced. Storm, after all, already exists in her mainstream version, so it's not like it's the biggest loss in the world per se. I certainly don't see them bringing this character back anytime soon, and that's usually my problem with character death in these comic books, is that they're all so short-lived. This feels like it's for real, and the significance of the death is that much more compelling because of it. When we compare it to pretty much any other X-Men character that's died before and almost inevitably come back, this one feels like it's here to stay. And as for Cable, well, that's theoretically a big deal too, but this whole issue kind of revolves around a new Cable emerging. There's this hooded figure that seems dissatisfied with the way that Cable has been going to the past and tried to save things. And he basically executes his older self and is now on some sort of mad quest to save the future once more, though through more direct means, outright kidnapping the all-new X-Men, starting with Iceman, and intent on doing the same with all the others. This comic hints pretty heavily that this is all leading towards the all-new X-Men going back in time. What's basically been hinted at since this team was brought back from the past into the present by Hank McCoy all those years ago. The all-new X-Men have come a long way then. Basically, they languished as a team under Brian Michael Bendis' writing. He had a good handle on the characters, but just started writing them in the same story over and over again with this alternate future Brotherhood of Evil Mutants take that really didn't work the third or fourth time he did it. It became infuriating, and I left the series in a big way for a long time. Coming back to it, it's nice to see that there's been a lot of positive changes going forward. The characters are well written and feel true to themselves, while we have a bunch of new characters kind of joining this team and working with them, such as Rachel Summers and the aforementioned Bloodstorm. So I quite enjoy this overall. It's fun seeing like an older Jean Grey interacting with the younger one and seeing her future son Cable die. It was moving in its own way, and I quite enjoyed this issue for those reasons. As standard as the overall plot kind of is, at least in terms of X-Men stories, what matters here and what really sells me on everything is the quality of the character work being done in this issue. Ed Brisson does a really good job with that, giving characters like Iceman little funny moments, but not too exaggerated to the extent that they're cringy either, while also giving us a lot of depth. Cyclops is basically on a date with Storm when she's killed, and it's tragic and moving, but also a pretty awesome scene. It's fun having a big event with Ahab and his hounds being a central focus of it. And when we look at these preview images of the future covers for the rest of this event, it seems like we're going to get a lot of fun moments with the hounds and the exploration of what they are and how messed up they are as an idea. These mutants being forcibly transformed into this thing that is hunting other mutants and slaughtering them. It's brutal and tragic in its own way, to the extent that I quite enjoy the dynamic going on with it already. And the artwork is really phenomenal too. Pepe Larraz does a really good job with some of the penciling they do throughout this comic. when we look at these early images, there's a lot of already iconic moments. I've seen this particular panel a bunch of times now on Twitter already, and I feel like it's just going to become one of those fundamental images that really summarizes what the X-Men are all about. It feels like they're really doing a good job at dealing with the politics of X-Men that have existed since the beginning of their time, without it coming across as very like ham-fisted or heavy-handed in any meaningful way. The politics itself feel particularly relevant. I've made that comment before about the X-Men in this day and age, and people can grumble all they want about that, but the fact of the matter is, the X-Men find themselves once again in a world where their politics are very relevant once more. And more importantly than that, the way that they're being covered by Ed Brisson and others in the X-Men titles works. It's nuanced, it fits in with the modern age, and it doesn't feel forced or out of place. It's well written and fits fundamentally well within the context of the story at hand. Part of it has to do with the fact that Marvel has finally let the X-Men off of their leash. Now that all the politics and business with Fox is out of the way, we can really dig into the X-Men again. So at the outset of this story, we get these new characters being fronted, and something small like that really makes a difference, and is something that the old X-Men comics couldn't do even a few years ago. It makes all the difference in the world because it framed this story in a nice way and opened things up in a way that felt true to the X-Men and what they stand for. To that end, I really enjoyed this comic and think X-Men fans would as well. As much as it would be easy to write off all of this stuff as just kind of standard X-Men affairs, this comic is pretty special and transcends the usual dynamic behind a crossover event like this within a specific wing of either Marvel or DC, because it's character focused, and I love these characters. Not just the classic X-Men, but Rachel Summers and the older Jean Grey, Nightcrawler. It's really fun seeing them in action together. And I'm an easy sell for this sort of thing. It's hard to go wrong in that regard as far as I'm concerned. There's only one other thing I want to talk about, and that's the interesting dynamic going on with the plans for these X-Men characters, the ones from the past who the comics have been hinting at for some time now at being sent back to the past. I think that's the most obvious and direct path for this team, but I'm not sure that's the direction they're heading towards. I feel like that's the red herring of this story, the fake out that they want us to keep thinking they're doing, but is not what's actually planned. If I were a guessing man, I feel like the X-Men crew, the editorial team behind it, and the writers are planning a sort of Superman Reborn event with this Extermination story. I could be wrong, maybe they are going back to the past and it's going to lead to a change in the overall timeline of the X-Men. That would actually be kind of cool. But if I were to guess, I would assume that the old X-Men are being merged with the younger versions. And they're going to kind of become this sort of amalgamated version where some of their timeline and history is true, but they're also going to be younger characters with more of their future ahead of them. That sounds exciting to me and a nice way to sort of simplify the timeline and complicated nature of the current X-Men status quo. Whether or not that happens, well, we'll have to see. So let me know what you guys think of my little idea in the comment section below. Thanks for watching, and if you like Comic Island, be sure to check out our Patreon page in the video description below. We could always use a little bit of support. Finally, don't forget to like, subscribe, and keep reading comics.